Okay. So put this together about editing timesheets, mostly because one, I don't think we get a lot of Workforce Go training, and two, editing timesheets seems to be an issue for some of the more quirkier things. So hopefully this will cover that, and along the way we'll cover some other parts too. Like a couple of weeks ago, I did training on reports and customizing reports. So we're actually going to go through one of those and show you how to add it to your dashboard. So today's agenda, we've got going through the payroll process very briefly, viewing employee timesheets, adding time entries, splitting time entries, labor distribution, approving employee timesheets, mass edits, requesting time off for other employees, and approving and rejecting change requests. So I tried to include a little bit of everything that directors and timekeepers probably deal with on a weekly basis. So hopefully this will be good. So in our timesheet process, we sort of have a couple of things. We have the pay period, which we're in now. We're generating timesheets. Work hours are being processed through our punches. We're granting leave or signing leave, like the COVID admin leave, that kind of stuff. All that's happening through tomorrow. So we have a 2-week pay period. And once we're done tomorrow, on Thursday, program directors have a responsibility to finalize and approve all of our timesheets based on the activity that happened during the pay period. And Thursday, when directors are finished with that, on Friday, our payroll department actually starts preparing and processing payroll. And that's based on the timesheets you've prepared. And so generally, Thursday or Friday morning, probably around 10 or so, Marilyn will run payroll, process payroll, which will include grabbing whatever timesheets are out there. So hopefully by that point, we're done making any edits or changes that need to be done so that they're correct and it doesn't cause a new payroll to have to be run for any employees. Once that payroll is finalized, another employee in payroll will then be responsible for getting this information posted to Intact and doing the process of funding payroll. And some stuff to keep in mind on the payroll process, any changes to timesheets after payroll has started. So if Marilyn starts payroll Friday at 10 a.m. and we realize that we had an employee we didn't give admin leave to, or they forgot a punch out, that kind of stuff, if we make that change after she started payroll, the process has already begun and their pay statement will be processed at an incorrect number of hours. So we need to be careful on the timing of that and make sure we're completely done on Thursday. Payrolls ran as soon as possible to ensure there's enough time to fund our payroll accounts. So each program doesn't pay for their own payroll. We pay the payroll account. So on Friday, when payroll's finalized and another employee starts getting these vouchers done, it's so that the treaty office or LEAP, legislative affairs, IT, whoever, can actually then have a check written out of their funds and into the payroll account so that come payday, there's enough funds to cover our direct deposits and paychecks. The data posted to Intact from Workforce Go relies heavily on how a timesheet is prepared and how your employee's profile is set up and when the setup was put into place. And so we'll get into that when we get into editing the timesheet. So when we view an employee's timesheet, if you're not using the new look Workforce Go, that's what we're going to use today. So this will give you a good chance to hopefully get a little more familiar or more comfortable with how it works. But when we're going to view the employee's timesheet in the new Workforce Go, we got to show the menu, go to the Team tab, click on Timesheets, Manage Timesheets, and then finally click on All Timesheets. So we have like 6 clicks we got to do with the mouse to see a timesheet. And then off to the side, I have a little GIF of that. So if you go to the website to view this guide that I emailed you guys a link to yesterday, this GIF will be in in the presentation there also. So when we go to timesheets, depending on the view you have, you'll be able to see a list of employee timesheets. So if I work in the treaty council, I'm only going to see the employees that are employed there. We're not going to see employees from finance or anywhere else. So your access determines the results you see. And if you haven't been there before, you haven't changed the view, you're going to land on a default view, which will have the employee's name and some raw hours, some just like basic information, and it'll be for the current month. So you can make a change to that report at any time. So we're going to go into Workforce Go. So your home page will look something like this. And so at this point, we've probably seen whatever it is we have here. I don't remember what the default stuff was, but I've modified mine a little bit. But we're going to come up here to show the menu, which is these three little lines in the upper left corner. And this opens up areas that we have access to. You have your favorites. Yeah, I'm going to show how to add one of the reports to the dashboard, Phil. So we have our favorites. I've set mine up so I have links to Intact, to a reports area that I use a lot. I got to reset employee password, so that takes me there. So you can set up internal and external links as a nice, easy way to go to navigate around Workforce Go or outside of Workforce Go. The one silhouette, that's my info, that's you. You go to that, this is your timesheet, your benefits, your pay, all the information concerning you, so you don't have to confuse it between your stuff and then employee stuff. We have the two silhouettes, which means team. So this is where we're going to be going, and you'll have a list of what you have access to. And then the last part's the admin part, which you guys will have some access to this when it comes to mass edit. So we'll go through that. So we're going to go to timesheets. So I'm going to go to the team area. We're going to open up time. Here's the timesheets. We're going to manage current timesheets, and we want to see all timesheets. Now, the default view you get is going to be a little different what I have. I have it geared just to go right away to me. So we can see that for the current and next month, I have 2 timesheets that are viewable. And we've had 2 pay periods that end or begin this month. So we can see the timesheet ends 6/10 and 6/24. The raw hours I have viewing, and of course whether or not it's been approved or not. And so just a basic look at my timesheet from this view. So depending on your access, if you're a program director or a timekeeper, you're going to have employees assigned to you. Yours is going to populate with other employee information. Now you can add more information to this report or filter it out. So I've got it filtered, just a very simple filter. Anyone whose first name starts with Lewis and whose last name starts with MO is what's displaying on this report. So it just so happens that combination, it's just me that meets that criteria. You can filter the report to include other information if you wanted to. And these are some of the filters we have here. You have the equal sign, meaning whatever you type here, it needs to be exactly whatever you have here. So if I type equals Lewis, it'd be everyone whose name is Lewis and no other parts to that. No Louise or like Wayne's is in there as Lewis Wayne. It wouldn't bring up his name. So the equals part is very strict, and we'd have to understand what we're doing here on the filter part. We have the do not equals. So if I wanted to bring up everyone who doesn't equal Lewis, I could use that and then filter the report to see, okay, here's everyone but Lewis. Starts with, if we weren't sure how to spell someone's name, maybe we're starting it with the letter K, we didn't know how to spell Kristen, or was it Kirsten, that kind of stuff. Not starts, like, not alike. We have all these different options we can choose to modify any of these fields on this report. So this report, from a perspective, if I was the director and I log in, I see raw hours. Raw hours isn't what's been calculated for me to be paid. So I might want to see like our work hours, our time on the clock, or in this case, COVID hours, right? And we don't see that here. You could preview or view these, use these buttons to view the timesheets, or we can add it to this view. Up here in the right corner, as users, we'll all have these ellipses. And when we put the mouse on top of it, it says actions. This lets us take other additional steps to modify the report. And we have this area called add or remove columns. And what that does is it shows us two different columns. On the left side are all the columns we have available to us in a timesheet list that we can add to the report. And on the right side is everything that's already been added. And so I'm going to quickly scroll through the stuff on the left, but there's maybe 40, 50 different fields that we can add. So you can build a really big report if you want to know, put across there all leave types, all work types, whatever it is, so we can get a big report to see what builds to the 80 hours that a full-time employee would generally have. But we want to see, in this case, our regular hours and COVID hours. So it's a lot to look through and all this stuff to look. So we're given a little search box up here. So if I started typing regular, it's going to bring up the three options that have that available in the report. We have calculated hours by regular, calculated work hours by regular, and extra pay amount by regular. We don't use extra pay, so that's not something we would need to add to our report. So I'm going to pick the calculated hours by regular. And now that I've checkboxed this, I have an option to add. When I click add, it'll move it to the current columns. So it's added it to the bottom. And now with it selected, I can use these arrows to change where it's going to go in display in the report. I'm going to set it next to raw hours. And now we want to find the added COVID leave. So now we have four options of that. And so I'm going to choose the calculated hours by COVID-19, add to the report, and then I'm going to use the arrows to move this up next to regular. And when we're done, I can click apply. Oh, I've got the do not equal. All right, so here we are, looking at my timesheet. Here's the regular hours. So we know in the last pay period, I've had regular hours worked of 16.5 hours. And I have COVID leave from the last pay period of 63.5 hours. That hasn't been added to my timesheet yet in this one, so we have no information to show. And for this pay period, we see my regular hours are at 16.75. So this could be a valuable report looking at it like this. And if this is a report you're happy with, we can then come over back up to our actions. And we can actually save the report so that we can always have this view available to us. So I'm going to save view as. It's a copy of a view I've had, but I want to give it a new name. And I'm going to call it timesheet COVID. You can give it a description to help you look back later if it's like a specific kind of report we're looking for. If you choose my default, that means anytime you come to timesheet, that'll be the report that loads for you rather than the default view. So it'll save you time from having to constantly find the report. And you can share it with others if you wanted to share it with another person. If you do share the report, and I work in IT and I share the report with somebody from personnel, unless you have the same access, all you'll be sharing is like the boiler template of the report, and they'll be able, the other person will be able to see what they have access to. So something to keep in mind. So I'm going to use my default save and run. So it's going to rerun the report. And now my settings have been saved. So the next time we come back to this, it'll be this view that has regular and COVID added to it. Any questions up to this point on this timesheet view? Okay. So now to Phil's question, we can cover how to set up the dashboard. I'm going to go back out to the dashboard here. And when I go to time, I've got nothing here. And so we've probably all have clicked across this to see why is there nothing, or if when I click add, there's nothing for me to choose, that kind of stuff. So this is what we got to do. I'm going to go back to our timesheets. I've got this report locked and ready to go. Up here, there's this little piece of paper that has a little table on it. And so I'm going to click on that. Right now, we're looking at data only. We can look at charts only or data and charts. I'm just going to click on charts only. This is one I've created in the past, but we're going to create a new one. We want to add a chart. And now we can start to choose the types of reports that we have. And so this will be based on the stuff that you have built into your report, which is these categories. So an employee ID, COVID-19 hours, for example. Do you want to average, a total, count, minimum, maximum, that kind of stuff of the values we're selecting? You can add other categories. Choose the different types of stuff that you would want to display and give it a title. Now we click save. That report just has me. So here's that timesheet that has 63.5 hours. So if you had multiple employees that had the COVID leave, you're going to have them all listed, and they'll all have this bar chart here showing COVID hours or whatever it is that you're selecting. So now this report's here on the timesheet area where we can go between data and charts. So now if we go back to our dashboard, time still doesn't have anything, but now we can add this report to our dashboard. So it's going to give a list of all these different reports you have. We created a timesheet report. I can start typing that in the search field. So we've got timesheets. All timesheets is where I was. Here's the different views. So I had saved that report as a timesheet COVID name, if you recall. And I've got the COVID-19 hours by employee ID, and I can apply. And now we would have a chart in our dashboard. And you can do that for any type of hours, whatever it is that you would want to see through a timesheet. You can add like an attendance board. And that's through that, all these different things. So it'll only work if you're in the time tab, timesheet related stuff, team when it concerns your team, accruals, schedule, benefits, all the different stuff, that whatever's meaningful to you that you would want to use, this is how you would do that. So if I go to team, I created some dashboards of, in finance, I know that currently 9 people are punched in and 18 people aren't. You could build it with your employees' IDs, so then you could easily see, or names, who's currently here. Treaty council, there's I think 2 people, so maybe this wouldn't be too big of a deal. Phil can just look next door. But if you're IT, your people are running around the reservation supporting all these programs, you might not be sure that one of your employees is in. This attendance board view would tell you who is and isn't on the clock currently. All right. So we're going to move on to the next step, and that's adding time entries. I'm sure a lot of us have probably had to do this now with either editing someone's timesheet, that kind of stuff. But time entries can be added when needed to a timesheet. This may be needed if an employee forgets to punch in and out. If you're waiting to add time later for like the COVID-19 stuff, you're not sure how long an employee was coming in today, so you don't want to do the full 8 hours yet until they've worked. So in this section, we're gonna cover how to add a new row to a day. Within the timesheet, enter time entry information using available fields. Navigation's the same thing. Show menu, go to our team tab, timesheets, manage, and then all timesheets. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got our team tab. Stuff's already open because we have just done that. So we've got timesheets. We've opened the manage timesheets, and now we can go to all. And so here we are, back to the same view that I created as my default view, which is me. And we're going to take a look at the time period that's open, which is the one we're in now, that ends tomorrow. So you have some options, and the one we're going to do is edit timesheets. And so when we click on edit, it's going to take you to the current day, and you can see some basic information about what's happening with the employee. We can see the checkbook I get paid through, the program and the funding source that have been set up as my default cost centers where my payroll gets charged to. If this was a form of time off, this field would be filled in. Here's today's date, and there's the time I punched in today. 2 is blank since I haven't punched out, and so we don't have a raw total yet. And so if I were here until 12 today, we would see that my raw hours are 3.27. And if my boss comes through and says, well, now we need to add COVID admin leave to LJ's timesheet so that there would be an 8-hour pay for the day. Down here, we have the ability to add a row. So it duplicates the same information that's there for cost center. And over here now, if we did just 1 to 5, that's not going to get us all the way there, right? That's 4 hours, so that's 7.27 hours. So you're either going to have to calculate the hours in your head to put a time period in there, or instead of using from and to, here you can type the hours and get the total. And at that point, you'd be able to save the timesheet, and this day would be completed. All right. So we'll ask Augustine. Augustine, with this second entry I added, wanting to pay COVID leave, is there any part that I would have left out or need to do?
I don't think so.
All right. In the time off field, I don't have it designated as COVID. So if I left it like this, it's going to give me work hours. So what we'd want to do is you can click on the magnifying glass, choose the COVID type, and so now it'll differentiate that, okay, LJ was on the clock for 3.27 hours, and then that day he got 4.73 hours of admin leave. So just make sure if we're ever adjusting timesheets, if it concerns time off, we have to use this field. You can click the drop-down box, but if you don't use this very often, it's only going to have what you've ever used before. So use the magnifying glass, and it'll give you a list of all the time off times that we have. All these different types of admin, whether it's inclement weather, funeral, presidential, that kind of stuff. Our annual leave, bereavement, comp time, court leave, all the way through travel. So this is how we would signify on the timesheet that, first of all, this is correct, this is the type of leave it was, and that on the timesheet, it would calculate correctly that, okay, it's been categorized as COVID, so this is what it is. And then when payroll gets processed, Maryland gets timesheets going, or the pay statements going, it'll be based on this timesheet. And then when Christine starts working on getting the information into Intact, this stuff will control the calculations that go into Intact. So now it'll be identified as COVID on the general ledger instead of regular. And then to edit any other days, simple arrows up here that lets you go back and forth, or you can use this drop down and switch to another day. You can add notes. So if there needed to be a note on this timesheet, whatever it's going to be that should be recorded within the record of an employee's time, by all means, add a note. If there's like the travel paperwork or whatever that needs to be added to a timesheet, up here is where we can choose, click on Docs, and we can upload a document from our computer. So it'll be recorded with this stuff. So you make your notes, add documents if needed, and then save. But we're not going to save this one. Yeah, any employee of the tribe is in Workforce GoFill. All employees have to be paid through this system. So whether they're part-time, temporary, like during the summer, like the summer youth program at Sachangu Nation Employment Training, even though those are temporary employees who don't work a full day schedule, they're included in the system. All right, so I'm going to back out of this timesheet, back out to our timesheet list view. Next part of this is going to be on splitting a time entry. So this is valuable if you have more than one funding source that an employee might get paid from. And so you can split for the purposes of allocating time to different cost centers, programs, checkbooks, and funding sources. This is needed when a labor distribution plan is not applicable. So here's the same navigation to timesheets that is the same for every step that we're going through. What we want to do is we go to our timesheet, we're going to go back into the same one. And some of the departments out there and some of you listening now have multiple funding sources. So there's a possibility you might have an employee who gets paid from one fund and sometimes does work for another fund. It works this way, especially within grant programs. Now, if you see, like I'm here, we'll put back in that I left at noon today. As we're coming back through, and we know that, hey, you know what, from 11 to 12, LJ was actually doing work towards a grant. So how are we going to display that on this timesheet? So we're going to add a new row, and this goes to my default stuff. If you add an employee who can get paid from more than one funding source, you'll have access to that here to be able to select from other funds. And so for whatever reason, I'm also doing work with forestry. And we choose our funding source. All right, so here's one for forestry. So we add those things in, and now we can start splitting the time. This should be 11 a.m. to noon. And we change the end time up here to 11 a.m. It ends up with the same amount of hours I was on the clock for, except once the timesheet is processed and then Maryland processes our paycheck, it'll split the time between this so that on our financial reports, it'll be split appropriately and the grant paying for one portion and indirect cost paying for another. So it'll save time on the back end of trying to figure out, well, how much money does indirect owe a grant, that kind of stuff. So if you have employees that work across multiple grants, this is going to be one way you do this. Typically on your PA, you're going to include in there that the employee can get paid from whatever funding sources. And so when the employee is set up, the monitors will add those funding sources to the cost centers. So when you come to select, you'd have the ability to select based on what that employee has been authorized to be charged to. So when I open this up, you're not going to see, 100 checkbooks. You'll see the 2 or 3 that your program might use. And the same thing for program might just be the one program, and your funding sources, the handful of funding sources you have access to. So this is how you're going to split your time. And I know some of the programs that have employees that work this way, when they're switching at 11 to start work on another one, if they can, they'll have them punch out and punch back in. So it's immediately recognizable in a timesheet that this is how we track our time going forward. Now, if that can get complicated, there is something called a labor distribution. And this allows us to create as many profiles as necessary to allocate time the employee worked between different cost centers based on predetermined percentage splits. It could be a preferable option instead of editing a timesheet every day to split time across different cost centers. And this is probably the best solution when everything is the same each pay period. So I got a little snapshot of what council looks like. So council's pay is split 50% between general and 50% between indirect costs. And so on their profiles, they have a labor distribution profile so that no matter when they get paid through WFGO, the cost is split 50-50, regardless of what's been presented on timesheets or whatever's processed for them to get paid. And so this would be a good way that if you already have a grant or other forms of pay, you'd be able to split that right now rather than worrying about it later or having to edit the timesheet, especially if that can eat up a lot of time. And that's only if it works out to where it's an even split. So whether it's 50-50, we have some people split between 3 or 4 other funding sources. So it could be 25, 25, 50, whatever it is. We can do a labor distribution as long as it's the same every pay period. Okay. So we'll move to approving timesheets. Yeah, 3 places where you can approve timesheets. So I think everyone that's in here now has had to approve a timesheet. So you can use the My To Do icon. Still, is that what you use now if you're approving timesheets? All right. It's the easiest thing, right? Because as we're in Workforce Go, we have this bell that tells us we have work to do because it'll be something other than 0. So we can go to the bell, and if Vanessa or any employees have submitted their timesheets, or if you've submitted it for them, that list will be here of what we have to review and approve. And at that point, you can select all or go through one by one to reject and approve. You can also approve through the timesheet itself. So if we were back in the timesheet list view and we had a whole list of everyone that had submitted their timesheets, you could checkbox the one, and up here is an option to approve or reject. I even submit if we wanted to submit them all on behalf of an employee. And the third thing is, if we're inside the timesheet, we've finished making edits. Great, this employee is going to get paid 80 hours. We have an approve option. So a little bit handy with all the different places you can take these actions. You know, in Intact, we get one place to approve a purchase, and then that's it. Through Workforce Go, we get 3. Okay. So if there's no questions on approving, I'm gonna move to the next thing. How many people now are using mass edits? Okay. Well, we can use mass edits to mass edit time across one or more employees' timesheets. So if we didn't want to have to edit every single day for our staff, and we wanted to apply like the admin leave, the COVID leave, and it was going to be the same for everybody, we can do that in one swoop rather than having to go through everything. And so we can navigate to admin, which is the wheel in Workforce Go. We can find the mass edit menu option. We're going to open the submenu by clicking on mass edits, and we get 3 timesheet entries. We can add time, edit time, or mass edit time entries, punch in, punch out. So for those of us who've logged into Workforce Go in the last week or so, we've seen that there's the big message that says, starting tomorrow night, Workforce Go is going to be down for like 6 hours while they're going through some sort of update. And included in there, it says that means the time clocks are not going to be available. And so if we had staff that was working until midnight, that means they won't be able to punch out. And so you'd be able to select all of those employees, choose the date that's relevant to it, and choose the time of punch out, and then save without having to edit each employee. So it's a handy tool that we can use at our disposal. We'll go back into Workforce Go. We want to go to the little wheel. And depending on what you have access to, you know, the list will be either as long as this or a little bit different, but there's going to be a mass edit menu here that we can open. And then we have mass edit time entry add, mass edit time entry edit, mass edit time entry punch ins and punch outs. So let's take a look at the mass edit time entries add. When you go there, you'll be given a list of all the employees that you have access to. You can choose one, multiple employees by clicking the checkbox, You can choose this up top here, which says, do I want to select all on this page, which is 10 employees, or do I want to do this for all 1,000 employees? So if you have more than 10 employees and you have this default view, you know, it's going to ask you, do you want to select those 10 on the page, or do you want to select 17 or whatever it is you may have? So for the moment, I'm just going to pick one person. And this would, what we're going to do would apply to everybody. So I've got an employee selected. And in the upper right corner, we have mass edit time entries. When we come here, we're going to be given some options. What date are we looking to edit? Is this for one day? So if it was just for today, I've selected today. In the additional information area, is this a time off that we're adding? So it's going to be COVID-19 leave. And then we can add for what period of time, how many hours. I want 8 hours to be added to whoever I selected timesheets. And once we're done, this is all the information we have to add. I click add time entries, and that person's timesheet would update with this information I put in. And so if you had multiple employees and you had just the one day to update, you're done. You don't have to go through 5, 6 employees or however many it would be. If you have multiple days that you need to do this for, so like in ours, for finance, none of the admin leave is added yet. But let's say we waited till tomorrow, we're going to go ahead and sit down and we're going to do our admin leave. And I don't want to have to do it this way either, one day at a time. I can choose multiple days. Choose our pay period, which is June 11th to June 24th. Which weekdays do we want this adjustment to be added for? In finance, we work Monday to Friday. So I'd have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday checked. And we'll uncheck Saturday and Sunday. COVID is still there. I want 8 hours for each of these days that fall within this calendar. And I hit add time entries. All of the staff will have their admin leave added using just this screen rather than having to fumble through 14 days of timesheets for each employee. You would not have to use the checkbook, program, or funding source. Typically, all the employees already have those assigned to them. So it'll just default into what they already have. So like when we were looking at mine, if I added the time entries, all the finance indirect cost stuff would fill in for us. And so if you have employees getting paid from multiple things, like Augustine oversees Koya, KNI, and IT, if he does this and had all those employees selected, their appropriate funding sources will fill in without him having to have selected any of this here. Okay. So in Workforce Go, you can request time off for another employee. If they're not using Workforce Go for any reason to request their time off, or they had called in sick on the day timesheets are due and weren't able to make the request and didn't have access to a computer from home or wherever they are, we can go to the Show Menu tab. We're going to click on Team tab, Time and Time Off. So let me shorten the timesheet. So here's Time Off, which is below Timesheets. And then we have Request. And so here is where we can choose from our list of employees that we have access to request time on their behalf. and then you choose the time off type. Time off requests have to be completed. According to the tribe's personnel manual, leave is requested off. We can't just assign leave to people. There has to be a request process. So we want to make sure that we're doing this and going through these motions to record that a request has happened. And so once you do that, you'll be given the option then to choose which day are you requesting leave or days, and then you can submit the request. If you're the program director, you do this on behalf of an employee, you'll get the notice. The My To Do list up here will change to your one request that you have to resolve, even if you're the one requesting on behalf of an employee. All right, we're running close on time. Change requests. Is there anybody here that uses change requests now, so that you have your timesheet entered and you forgot to punch out or something like that, and you need that to be addressed? Or do you go chase down your supervisor or employees chasing you down to ask you to make a correction to their timesheet? Okay. So I see Phil's used it. Which is good. This is what I do because it's easier than trying to find somebody, especially if they're not here. And plus, you get your request recorded. So from someone's timesheet, an employee can submit a change request, and they can choose to add punches in, add punches out, cancel time off, change a punch in, change your punch out, or change your time off. And so let's go back to my timesheet here. So we have the change request button, which is up here at the top. This is where you choose one of those types. So based on this timesheet, let's say it's now Wednesday the 24th and you're the director, you're looking at this and you can see that I had a punch in but didn't punch out. Or I'm looking at my timesheet ready to submit it. I can add a punch out, choose the date, and then the time. So I do that and hit submit changes. My supervisor, Myrna, would get the notification for the My To Do part that I have a change request, and then she can review that to determine if did LJ really work till 4 or 5 or whatever it would be, and then either approve or deny it based on the merits of the request. It's a great way to communicate, but most importantly, it also documents your change that you wanted to make. So I'd encourage employees to be using this if they're submitting their own timesheets, so that they don't have to email or text you or Google message you, whatever it is, to try and find you to make that change. They should be documenting the request within their timesheet so you can address those as the week progresses or on timesheet day. And then once the request is approved, it takes place immediately on the timesheet. And of course, the easiest thing to do, because hard to ignore this bell when it changes from 0 to 1 or however many it is. Okay, so that's the end of this one. Are there any other questions about the timesheet part of this? Okay. I just want to finish up with one thing, especially as we're reaching a new fiscal year. I've seen there's new grants coming in. So if we were at this point in a pay period and we've gotten a new grant and we're switching funds, okay, and we're switching funds where I'm getting paid through indirect costs, but let's say this changes to LJ is now going to move to general. And so a PA, it goes through, they update my profile to general. If they made that change today, that does nothing to this timesheet going backwards. So if you have an employee that you're changing on a personnel action form to be changed from another funding source to a new funding source, one of the first things you need to do when processing time at the end of the week is you need to look at these timesheets to make sure the right funding source is done. The changes can only be made at the beginning of the week or beginning of a pay period to be reflected throughout the pay period. So it doesn't go backwards and correct it. You may have to make an adjustment, and then on the next timesheet, it'll be normal the way you expected it to. All right, so I've got a couple questions. So the first question I have is, how do we do the admin leave for construction?
Hey, LJ, are you still here?
So I punched in at 8 what today? Okay, so the construction cost me 5 minutes of time today. Whatever the allowable period is for us to be late today to work. So let's say it's a half an hour. And we want to add this in. We can add a row here. Choose the appropriate admin leave. And there would be the addition for the construction. We could add a note to say that, hey, on this date, there's the admin leave. Or, of course, you can always mass edit it too if all your employees were affected. So the other question is the COVID leave still being paid out of our budgets, or is that paid out of the COVID money? As it stands, any of the COVID-related leave, like in the case for me, for example, and then this would apply to everybody, it's going to be paid out of our own budgets. And a determination is made with the COVID monies on what is refundable or reimbursable. And then so those funds would then be used to reimburse yours if that's determined to be allowable. And I don't know the answer to that, whether it is or isn't. And will the time for Thursday be entered, or do we enter it? Thursday is going to be a holiday, which usually means it's on the schedule for Workforce Go. And in that case, it'll be automatically applied by the system if it's in the schedule. So you shouldn't have to do anything if it's there as a holiday. And we can't see that yet since the timesheets we have only go through today. So not until Thursday morning will we see the timesheets get started. So Thursday morning, take a look. And if holiday's there, you're good to go. Otherwise, you may need to look at doing a mass edit to add holiday to your staff. Okay. Well, that's all the time I needed to take up for you guys today since we're about an hour in. If you have questions, you can contact me by email, which is usually the easiest way given our circumstances. I'm not always in the office. So I'm going to listen back to the video and make sure everything's okay. And if it is, probably later today, I'll have this video uploaded on my training site. So thank you very much, guys. Thanks for your time. Have a good day.